Hey listeners, well, we've arrived at the very last episode. Well, the last we recorded anyway. I reckon Pastor Jock and Helen's life has many more episodes to come. This is part 4 of our series, and so if you've arrived late to this party, make sure that you go back and listen to episodes 1, 2 and 3. I hope you enjoy. God bless.
We've just had a nice lunch.
We did have very nice lunch.
We did have a nice lunch.
Which is why you keep coming back. You're not coming back for the testimony, you're coming back for the lunch.
No comment.
That's true.
So we're going to see how we could go today to see if we can get to present day. Yep. But there's a lot of years between when we finished last, which was, I think our last recording finished when we'd purchased the Vogue in Adelaide because the revival was going gangbusters.
So we bought the Vogue in 76 and we'd come from Elizabeth with about 330 people, and we'd started off in Elizabeth a decade or so before with only 30 people.
Yeah.
So it really had in the mid-70s, early 70s to mid-70s, it had really taken off.
And then by the time we bought the Vogue in sort of 1976,
yes, 1976,
we
had outgrown because we had 3 halls at Elizabeth. The first one only seated about 70 people, and then we used that one as a Sunday school while we built half a hall, and we filled that, I remember, to about 180 people, and then the other half we built. The first hall just had a blank wall and no foyer. When we did the other half, we also ended up completing the whole building, and that was starting to bulge at the seams at about 330. And that's when Pastor John very dramatically said one day, we've got to go back. No, not got to. It's time. We went back into Adelaide and started looking. We didn't know what we were going to buy. I won't go through we did look at a lot of other places. Fortunately, we caught it, as happens with theatres. Sometimes they're popular and sometimes not. We caught it right when black and white TV was converting to colour TV, and it caused and once colour TV came in, all the theatres suffered as a result. So we got a theatre at a very reasonable price.
And so then we had a theatre that sat 600 or 100 or 900 people?
Yeah, not when we first got it. We had to redo the seating downstairs and increase the area down. But when we finished all that, we all redid the platform. We had just a big sloping platform at the front because it was a theatre.
I remember as a kid rolling down that slope.
Rolling down that. Exactly. So we pulled all that out, and the old stage was still there. Just took the front bit off, the ramp off, and then put a lot more seats in, and we ended up with seating for 900. But right at that time, when we moved from Elizabeth to Adelaide, bound to happen, I suppose, we lost a few people. Just weren't prepared.
Just because of the distance?
Because of the distance. I remember one couple in particular where the guy had done a lot of work on the hall and he couldn't get his heart to agree to leave the hall. He just
the original hall at Elizabeth.
Hall, it was his hall. We had actually sold the hall to the Assemblies of God. So another Pentecostal church moved in, so they stayed there. But it was very, very few. A lot of people in Gawler, a lot of people in Elizabeth, Salisbury, all started going to the Vogue. But it's also at that time started to really boom down south, and a lot of that, the revival from then on, was already quite a few down south, even when we were right up at Elizabeth. People like the Gunters and that were travelling all the way to Elizabeth from Moffat Vale. So then we bought a house just around the corner from the Vogue in Goodwood, and it just went with the old saying, gangbusters, and we were slowly starting to baptise more and more people.
I can just remember the upstairs creche was just full of babies, 25 babies, where the bassinets were just lined up and you had to step over them. I think we had 500 kids under 5 in the Sunday school or something at one point. It was enormous.
So with all this excitement going on, when did you move to New Zealand?
Right, so we'll jump to that point, 1982.
So not long after. It was only
not
a few
long
years,
after, and it had grown to around just before we went to New Zealand to 1,000 people from the 330 from 1976. So in 1982, it was actually Pastor John's suggestion that we go on a holiday through New Zealand. First time we ever went overseas. And we went with a couple of the sisters in the Lord, just Helen and I and 2 sisters, young women. And what we did notice on that holiday is that there was no fellowship in the South Island.
Right.
There had been one years before in Christchurch, but there was nothing there at that point. We were so used to being at 3 or 4 meetings a week to go for 10 days, I think it was, in the South Island with no fellowship, other than we had fellowship, and travelled to Christchurch, to Dunedin, out to Queenstown and all that, we noticed no fellowship. And then Wellington, Rotorua, Bay of Plenty, Auckland, Bay of Islands and so on, they were all fellowships up north, and we went to all of them. It was very exciting. And we did comment, not so much on Christchurch, we commented on Dunedin. Wow, a city of 120,000 people and no fellowship. Christchurch was over 300,000, and with our fellowship I'm talking about. So I never thought much more about it. And we came back to Adelaide in 82, and then halfway through 83 there was a thought that we should have a better assembly in London. We had a little assembly, it didn't seem to be going anywhere, and we really needed
London.
We need a really good assembly in London. And Pastor Darryl Williams had done really well in Dubbo, and we all sort of felt like we don't want Pastor Darryl stuck in Dubbo for the rest of his life.
I was in Dubbo at that particular. We spent a year in a little bit less than a year
exciting.
in Dubbo. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I remember Pastor
So this
Darryl
is
in
around
Dubbo.
80, 81.
Wow.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
So Pastor Lloyd came to Adelaide, and we had a big discussion on where Darryl should go or where he'd like to go, Sydney. And Pastor Lloyd went out of the room for a minute, and when he came back in, he's coming to Adelaide. Yeah, how did that happen? One minute he's going to Sydney, and what had happened is when Pastor Lloyd had gone out, Pastor John had turned to Darryl and just said, what do you think about coming to Adelaide? And Darryl said, that's where I want to go. So he then came to Adelaide around 81, I think, somewhere around that time, and he fitted in like a glove. And I used to do nearly all the Sunday night preaching. Pastor John used to do the afternoon, but I immediately split it with me and Darryl on a Sunday night. I said to Pastor John, hey, we can't have this guy sitting in the back seat, he needs to be there. So Darryl and I started to share Sunday night. And I think by that time too, Pastor Graham and Pastor Darryl, somewhere there became pastors. They'll remember when it was.
Yeah.
But for a while there was just Pastor John and I. And so let's jump to going to New Zealand. So halfway through 1982, there was this discussion on somebody go to London, and Darryl's name came up again a couple of years after he'd moved to Adelaide. And he was quite keen about the idea, and we drove to the rally in Melbourne in the middle of 1983. It's the year after we'd been on holidays to New Zealand. And I heard, I wasn't much in the discussion, but Darryl's going to go to London. I just said to Helen, wow, that'd be exciting, because we'd gone to Kangaroo Island and Hobart and sort of itchy feet, but we were very much part of Adelaide at that time. And so I think I'd been in Adelaide 16 years without going anywhere. And I just said, that'd be exciting, just discussion. And at the end of the rally, Darryl decided he didn't want to go to London. He liked it in Adelaide. And I thought, if Adelaide can do without Darryl Williams, it can certainly do without me. So I went and saw Pastor John. He wasn't very excited about it. But in the end, he gave way. It was just hard to get Pastor John to give way. And so he said, all right, but you've got to keep it. No, we'll get to that in a minute. So he said, that'll be all right. I went home and talked to Helen, or maybe I talked to Helen about it already, but I talked to the kids. I had 3 teenage children, and they weren't keen because they were all in the young people's at the time. London's a long way away. And the other thing Pastor John said was whoever goes to London needs quite a lot of money to even survive. And we had a little bit, but you reckon not enough. So I couldn't quite get the clear okay from him. And Helen and the girls went. And then Helen said, I said to Helen, hey, but we've got the okay to go somewhere. I don't want to lose that. I don't want to go back. So then Helen said, what about Christchurch? So it was Helen's fault.
Blame me.
So I said, yeah, well, that's the thought. And we talked to the girls, well, it was only New Zealand, close to Adelaide sort of thing. So I went back to Pastor John, said, no, we won't go to London. We'll go. And as you know, later on, Ray Ledger and Chris Kernahan, they went to London and got London going. So, but that was straight after the rally, so sort of end of June when we decided we were going to go to Christchurch. I think rightly so, Pastor John said, well, when are you going to go? I said, well, we've got to let the kids finish this year's schooling, so it won't be till Christmas time. And he said, well, therefore, I don't want you to announce it. He said, I'll let you announce it right at the last minute. I don't want it to be a distraction. This is typical wisdom of Pastor John. It was very right. It was a very good thing to say. We don't want thinking about that. I mean, I would have rushed in. We're going to Christchurch, you know. Funny thing that did happen then is Mark Watcho came to me with another brother in the Lord at the time, Cameron Singleton.
I know Cameron.
Yeah, two young guys, doctor these days.
Yeah.
And they wanted to go off and do something for the Lord. They were around 20 or something. And I'm thinking, I know where I want you to go, to Christchurch, but I'm not allowed to say that to you. So they talk about another place on the East Coast somewhere to go and help there. And so we kept it quiet until, I think, November, only a couple of weeks before we went, and announced that Mark came to me straight after, why didn't you tell us that? I know where we're going to Christchurch with you. So we were very lucky straight away. People wanted to come with us. And we had a townhouse in Goodwood near Hyde Park, but actually Goodwood, just on King William Road there. And we put it up for sale. I was a conveyancer, a land broker, as they called it then. So I knew all about the legal part of real estate, but I hadn't sold any real estate. And gave it to one of my clients, a salesman that I knew was very good. He didn't sell it. And we thought we might have to rent all our money was tied up in that. And so we ended up going, and I think it was 3 days before we left, the agency ran out. And I just put a very simple little ad in the paper, and I said something like, I advertised in those days 77,000, offers above 77,000. And I think it was about 2 days before we left, we had all those binding things, packing the teachers, and the place looked like a bomb had gone off. And this guy came around. I just said, oh, all right, come and have a look. He came around, he walked over everything, went through there. I just went on doing up the box that I was doing. He came back and he said, all right, I'll buy it. And I said, so what do you want to pay for it? He said, oh, 77,000. I was very cheeky. I said, offers above 77,000. So he gave me another $1,000 and we'd sold it. And I said to him then, I think it was on a Thursday or Friday or something, and I just said, if you cool off, we have the 2-day cooling off, 24, 48 clear working days. We have the weekend in between. And I said, if you cool off, we're done. He said, I will not cool off. And he never did. So the settlement would already gone. I got on a bus and we went to Melbourne, not to Adelaide Airport. We went from Adelaide to Melbourne and then caught a plane to Christchurch. And that's how we landed in Christchurch, as Helen said earlier today, on a very cold, wintry summer's day on the 9th of December. And I'd booked a cabin and a caravan park. And when we got there, it really was shocking. It was impossible to almost stay there.
It was freezing cold. And like I said to you before, Jock went off with Leonie in the taxi, and I'm sitting on the case with Vicky alongside me, and I'm thinking, oh, Helen, what have you done? In Adelaide, the sun is shining.
We'd left one daughter back in Adelaide, Ruth, because she was already engaged and got married 6 months later to David Russell. So it was just the four of us. And Leonie immediately said, I'm not going back to school. So it was only Vicky that ended up going to school. And so
there's nobody else there? There's no fellowship there?
Well, there was.
Oh, there was,
didn't
okay.
know that.
Right.
We didn't know there was anybody in the whole of the South Island. But there was a young couple, and we went out one day on it. We only had push bikes. Can't believe we brought a car from Australia.
We shipped the car across.
Shipped the car across. People did things like that then. And the cars in New Zealand at the time were all bombs. And then they later on brought in these Japanese imports, second-hand cars. Yeah. Standard of cars went up.
Well,
but we did take our push bikes.
And we had them with us at the cabin.
On the plane.
But within a week in that cabin, I just had enough. And we moved into a motel.
But while we were in the cabin, we came back one day and there was a note pinned on the door.
It says, welcome to Christchurch, and we'd like to see you. And right at the end, he put, God bless ya, Y-A, God bless ya. Oh, that's interesting. And we went around there, and we did have somebody, just a young couple with a little baby. So Phil Maxwell and his wife came. We got you and Maxwell in the assembly here in Adelaide, and they came over with their children. We had a little meeting in the motel, and then we moved up to a house.
Yeah, we all lived in the same house.
And Fred Needham,
First.
pastor in Auckland at the time, had got up to his assembly, in front of his assembly, and said, we're starting a new assembly in Christchurch, and they need people to help them. Anybody that wants to go to Christchurch can just go. And we picked up about 3 or 4 couples and a couple of singles, and people came from Adelaide.
Yeah, right.
Until Adelaide got upset with us. And I got a phone call from Pastor John, said, you've got to stop people going. And I remember I said to him, very cheeky, I said, I didn't ask them to come. He said, you didn't discourage them though, did you? I thought, no, I didn't. And then I did say, stop. I think within about a month, though, we ended up with 20 people.
Right.
So we had an incredibly good start.
Yeah.
But
Not
we
all
bought
of
a
them.
hall. We bought a hall as soon as we got there with the money from the sale
I'd done
of
a
our
little
property.
development in the Adelaide Hills, which would have cleared our mortgage, and we had a great business, and we're right in the middle of Adelaide. We blew all that. I went to Christchurch, and so where was I going there with that?
Well, we bought a hall. We didn't want the people to be in a hired hall because I think about the hired hall we had up at Elizabeth originally. We used to have to get there early on a Sunday morning and sweep
Set
the
everything
beer
out.
out
Yeah.
the door.
Yeah.
And we didn't want to go through that again. So we thought we would rather be the ones that were in the rented accommodation. But the
You
assembly
personally,
could be,
being in a rented house,
Yes.
so the church could have a hall that it owned.
Yeah, that was
So that was
the way
better
to
for
go.
us. And within
Yeah.
about a week, and Joe Maxwell, Phil's wife, rang me up and said, there's a little hall advertised. And so when I had a look at it, it was very run down. We used to all joke that we have white ants in Australia, but in New Zealand they have borers. And they reckon that the only thing holding the building together was the borers holding hands. And it was riddled with borer all over. And but gee, a lot of people got saved in that hall.
Yeah.
People come to really love it. Funny old beat-up hall down near the North Brighton Beach. So away we went.
we used to go outreaching on Friday nights
That's right.
in the square because there was a section of land around the cathedral where you could stand between that and the council land, so you were neither on anybody's land particularly.
Well, if you're on the council land and they say you just step back
Yes,
and you're on
that's
Anglican
right.
land. So I never tried to control it.
But just talking to people on the street, that first year we baptised over 40 people that came.
Wow.
It was very exciting.
But it was very exciting.
And you were still, Adelaide was still booming, Melbourne was booming, so revival was big everywhere at
Just
that time.
everywhere, generally,
Everywhere.
because
Oh,
that was
yes,
the time
yes.
It was.
of society.
The
Yeah.
hippies, the surfies, the drug addicts. That's when we really had great revival.
Yeah. And so how long did you stay in New Zealand for?
15 years.
Okay, so a long time.
15 years. Yeah, so really I suppose we just ticked along and we got up to about 80 spirit-filled people, maybe a little bit more now and again, maybe with kids about 120 people. We eventually sold that hall, moved into a rental property for a while, went and bought another hall in Shakespeare Road, and well, that's how we sort of ticked along. I mean, it really went okay until, unfortunately, the 1994 split, and that really did wreck New Zealand, not totally wreck it, but it was a very sad day. So
And so this was the first fellowship in the South Island. Did others spring up
yes,
outside
we had
of
a
that?
great revival, and that was why it was a shame what happened in '94. So we grew. Tell the story of the starting of the Dunedin, which is the next biggest city. Got 4 or 5 big cities in New Zealand: Auckland number 1, Wellington number 2, Christchurch number 3, Dunedin number 4, and maybe Hamilton number 5.
Yeah.
And so they're the big towns in New Zealand. So Dunedin had about 120,000 people. Big university, Christchurch is too, but particularly Dunedin was a university town. And they have an interesting setup, I'm sure they mostly still got it, that each university only specialises in 2 or 3 subjects. So in particular, if you want to be a doctor, in New Zealand, you study in Dunedin.
Right.
Whether you live in Auckland or wherever you live, you go to Dunedin and study there. And that's what happened. Not that the guy got converted was a doctor, although his girlfriend was studying to be a doctor. Graham McKinstry was studying computer science. And we didn't even know he was there. Mum and Dad in the fellowship up in Auckland. And it's interesting, all his family were just workers, blue-collar people. And when he said he wanted to go to university, it was, hey, we don't go to university, but he did, and he was very good. And then right on Easter, we'd only been there, whatever that was, 3 months, 1984, let's have a little camp. We had enough people. A lot of people had moved in from... I'll just digress for a second. It was interesting trying to form an assembly where people had come from Adelaide and people had come from Auckland, because there's quite a few different, not doctrinally,
just cultural differences.
But even the way assemblies were run, different way of doing things. So trying to
And how we sang the choruses.
Amazing.
Yeah.
But it did all work, you know. And some of the Auckland people went back, didn't work out for them. Some of the Adelaide people went back. I remember one couple that got quite upset with me, and it dawned on me what they were trying to do. And I said, are you trying to make me into John Coolman? I'll never, ever be John Coolman. And I said, you might be surprised at this. I don't want to be John Coolman. I want to be Jock Duncan. I want John Coolman to be John Coolman. So if you're going to try and make me like Adelaide, it's not going to work. You're going to be very disappointed. I could never live up to, Pastor John.
I think it's a really interesting point, because I've lived in lots of fellowships myself, and I know plenty of people that have, and I see. I see in each assembly a real personality of that assembly.
Yeah.
And it's often similar to what the personality of the city or the town is, obviously.
True.
And so, I've worked in business across the country, and I see in each, Sydney's different from Melbourne. They do business different in Adelaide, and you see the same thing in assemblies, right? They're just
very much so.
Just slightly different in the way they do things. And
That's
if we try and be what we're not, it doesn't work, because it's not authentic.
And they were a bit homesick, and then when people are homesick, they look for an out, and must be his fault.
Yeah.
Mostly was, I don't know. But, so they got a bit upset, some of them. Not badly, they just went back to Adelaide, went back into the Adelaide Fellowship.
Yeah.
But then others settled down, like Mark Watcho, Pastor Mark, as he is now, who took over when we moved back to Australia. He's only a young lad of 20 at the time, and he and Cameron came to be there to see if they would fit in, and after 6 months make up their mind. Well, 3 months down the track, Cameron decided he wanted to go back to Adelaide. That was good. Yeah. Studying to be an engineer, wasn't quite happy with studying to be, and later on studied to be a doctor, which is what he is now, a very successful doctor. And but Mark said, this is it, I'm not going home. Later on, his mum and dad moved over, Roy and Leah, both died.
I didn't realise he was from here originally. I interviewed Jason a little while ago about his healing on his heart, which is quite a few episodes ago. So, I didn't realise Pastor Mark was originally from here.
Yeah, so when his mum and dad came to the Lord, he was 6, and his sister Lisa was 4.
Something like that.
And so Roy and Leah came in 1968, had a huge impact on the Adelaide Assembly, because the same week they came, Rex and Thelma Hazy came, and the Assembly changed its whole direction when those two families came to the Lord. Yeah. So Mark said, no, I'm staying, which was very good for me, and he sort of became my 2IC over the years. I don't want to go into it all. We had ups and downs. Going back to what happened in New Zealand, I got this phone call around Easter when we'd been there, say, 3 months, around April, March, whenever Easter was that year, from this guy called Graham McKinstry. And he said who he was, and he's in Dunedin studying computer science. And he'd heard from Mum and Dad up in Auckland that we were there, and he said, are you having a little Easter camp? And we were going to just go to the hall each day, because we were amazing, had a little assembly, had a hall, and then just go, it was all new to us, let's go tourists on a very, very touristy place, New Zealand, all over the Banks Peninsula through to Akaroa, and all within 2 or 3 hours and all that sort of thing. We did that every day and had a meeting every morning and night over Easter. And that assembly, mostly about the same size, grew to about 30 or 40 people, mainly from the university. And then that was the first assembly after Christchurch. Then Blenheim, which is north of Christchurch, a guy called David Brown came down from Auckland. And then we had a little outreach in a town just south of us at Timaru. Ian Stephen was the young man that became the pastor. And then another guy from Sydney, we're just starting off in a town in between that, at Ashburton. And then, as I said, the split came and that sort of devastated all. But in its heyday, we had some great camps at Hamner Springs. We got up to over 220 people at the camps. A lot of North Islanders would come down. Aussies would come over. And it was like one fellowship. And that's really what did affect people when the trouble came in the 90s. I won't go through the negatives, but that was the reality of what happened there. But we did have some really good revival, a lot of miracles, and a lot of people just converted straight off the street, and a lot of them stayed.
Can you remember some of the miracles?
You're putting me on the spot. Well, let's talk a couple of testimonies. I mean, the one that really stands out is a couple. We had a brother in the Adelaide Assembly, you would have heard of him, called Paul Kay, and his wife Linda. Paul was an exceedingly good evangelist. And here in Adelaide, Heather Buck, witnessed to by Paul Kay. Mostly keep going. Del Sandeman was a friend of Pastor up in Cairns. Rose and Neil Jenner.
Yeah.
Witnessed to by Paul. And there'd be others if I thought long enough about. Married to in South Africa, Helen Carslake, witnessed to by Paul Kay,
which
is
in turn is Cam Singleton's
brother,
sister.
Yeah.
Correct.
But it was actually Helen that got witnessed to with Jess, the mother, when Paul was teaching her to play the guitar.
Yeah. Okay.
So as already established, a very good evangelist.
So Paul Kay came to
New Zealand. To Christchurch about a year after we got there.
Yeah.
And one where he struck gold again is he witnessed to Julie Watcho now. She was just a student as he was, decided to do teaching, and he witnessed to her, and Julie came in and, praise the Lord, married to Mark Watcho, and a great sister in the Lord, 3 children. You were just talking about one of the next generation down.
Yeah. And then there's Jean and Rose, of course.
Jean and Rose.
Who came to the Lord at that time. One of the times when Jock said to me, I had this crazy idea. I wanted to make bread dough jewellery and go and sell it door to door. I would meet people, see.
What jewellery?
Bread dough jewellery.
What is bread dough jewellery?
It's a very old-fashioned thing during the war years. In New Zealand, people made it in their homes and it was sold through the jeweller shops.
So you're talking, it's literal bread dough,
made of white bread and woodworking glue and food colouring.
Right.
And it was actually a big arty thing back in the 80s, and I thought it's something I could do because every now and then I would need to get some sort of a job because it's fairly expensive when you go out for the Lord and you need to have some extra income. So
what were you doing over there at the time?
Well, I got into 2 things, building in the good months and selling real estate. I'm not a very good salesman. So when winter came, I'd go and get a job selling real estate. I knew real estate because of the legal part.
Yeah.
I did reasonably okay, but as soon as spring came, I want to go back building. So I worked for about 5 or 6 different real estate companies. They got used to me after a while. You're only going to stay for a few months, aren't you? Sort of thing. So I think that petered out.
And so you were making bread dough jewellery.
So I was working on building sites. Building sites for ladies is hard work. I've actually done it for 40 years.
And pretty unprecedented back then, I imagine.
Possibly.
You probably wouldn't have been a number of women on building site back then.
The first house we had built, when we realised that renting wasn't really the way to stay, was a kit house. And we had bought a block of land. We bought the kit house. We thought there would sort of be instructions with a kit house, like A goes with A, but actually it turned up on the back of the truck and it was a complete house, no instructions.
So it's like an IKEA furniture set without the instructions.
That's correct. Only big, and we were living in a shed while we did it. It was very exciting.
But it wasn't even as good
cold.
as IKEA because at least they've got the things made up. Yeah. This was just a pack of wood and a stack of plasterboard.
Right.
And the plasterboard out in the weather.
Yeah, right.
With canvas over it. Imagine what happened to some of that.
But anyway, one of the brothers who came down from Auckland to help us in the fellowship, he was a builder. He was a Scottish guy and he had learnt building in Scotland. He had learned hard plaster, which is what they do there, not putting up plasterboard like we do.
It's the real stuff, right?
Real
horsehair, plaster. My grandfather was a plasterer.
Yeah.
So he would turn up for half a day once a week and say to us, do this, this and this. Now, we had a bit of background. We had a background in handyman stuff.
And actually, the house that we sold that we bought, the I'd done all the inside of it.
Yes, that's right.
So I got into building, and when we finished our first house, which I think was the most complicated one I ever did.
2-story, 4 dormer windows.
Dormer windows are complicated. The windows stick out on the roof. So
We built it in
I
6
said
months.
to Helen, I reckon I could do this. And so I bought a block of land and then got Scotty to come. Didn't need a building licence, can't believe that now. But they have about 7 inspections from the council. And as long as you do it to what they say you should do it,
Yeah, you're fine.
they don't bother you. So one of the thing we got into that really kept us going over those years was buying an old house with a big backyard, one with a big front yard. And then we built a little house in the backyard in a city development. And we had a lawyer who had, private money. What do you call that? Mortgage. Personal rich people's money.
Yeah, whatever.
Not a bank. And he would just give me as much money as I wanted. So I'd just go and I'd buy enough money to buy the block of land or the house, enough money to build the house, enough money to live on while I did it. So I never actually, it sounds like I tried to dodge paying tax, but I never actually had a salary because I lived off the money I'd borrowed. And because that sort of went into the house, and then we didn't do it very often, 3 or 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, I can't remember, and built a couple of houses for ourselves in the midst of all that. So it wasn't a huge amount of building, but it was good.
So while this is all happening, in the next shed we were living in, Jock said to me one day, things are starting to get a bit tight. You're going to have to go and get a job. So off I went. I actually had a day of prayer and fasting, and I went down to the local shopping centre and I walked around. I looked at every shop and I was looking for ladies my age in their early 40s that I could relate to, that I could talk to. I looked at them all. I got to the coffee shop and I said, yes, Lord, this is the shop. So I talked to the manager. I said, do you need anybody? He said, yes, I need a lady on the till and I need a cook. And I said, well, I don't think the till would suit me. I'm a bit shy of that, but I could be interested in the cooking job. So anyway, I became the cook, and at the same day as I did this, another lady came in who was a friend of the lady who creamed the cakes, and she got the job on the till, and her name is Jean. And so I started there, and I made my $115 a week, didn't I?
You did.
And I duly did my support of the family finances, and I watched these 2 ladies particular that I befriended, Jean and Rose, and then a couple of months down the track, I got them together one day at a coffee when we were having our morning tea, and something had happened. I won't go through the details of that. It was dramatic, and the Lord had done an amazing thing. I said to all the ladies in the shop, there's about 5 of them, I said, I've got a story I would like to tell you, but I don't want any of you to interrupt. And I'll start to tell you at morning tea. And I did, and this continued all week. And what I didn't know was that Jean and Rose...
And so what was the story you're telling them, your testimony?
The testimony of my daughter, who was born with, our second daughter, born with all the symptoms of Down syndrome. And then miraculously, somehow or other, all those symptoms disappeared, and she's very normal and a very high achiever now. And a miracle that, and I told them how I'd come to the Lord. I told them a lot of stories of our life. God had done things in our life. And at the end of the week, I asked them, would any of them like to come? And 2 of them.
Well, by the time it was divided, those who loved you and those who hated you.
Absolutely. It had divided completely. The Hate Helen group. She talks about God. But Jean and Rose had made an agreement that they would go to 4 churches looking for the Lord. They were both really looking for the Lord.
So this is prior to you talking to them?
Yes,
okay.
just prior. Yeah. And they had been, I think they had been to 3 at that point. And on the following Sunday...
The timing, amazing, huh?
The timing was fabulous. They came along and they both came to the Lord. And they're still happily walking with the Lord. And things became uncomfortable there. They definitely didn't like Helen working there anymore.
The other side, the anti-Helen group.
The anti-the Lord group.
Yeah.
And I left. And then I said to Jock, right, now I'm going to do the bread jar and fruit jewellery. So I manufactured all this stuff. You would buy a loaf of white bread, cut the crust off it, put it in the blender, put 8 tablespoons of aquadeer with it, mix it up like the dog's breakfast and knead it, and you would then put food colouring in it and use cake decorating tools and make earrings and brooches and such like.
And as the glue went off, it became hard.
Rock hard and would last forever. I've still got stuff.
And that's
made
like
30 years ago.
And they did it a lot in the Second World War because there was no money and no jewellery.
So then I had to get game and go and sell it. So I remember I got all dressed up, went to knock on the lady's door over the road, and I couldn't do it. And then the next day I got all dressed up, go and knock on the door. I can't do this. And the third day I went over, I saw the lady come home and I thought, Helen, you've got to do this time or you'll never do it. I went and knocked on her door and I said, hello, I'm Helen from over the road. I make bread dough jewellery. Have you ever heard of it? She said, no, come in. She bought about $30 worth. And I door knocked the street and the next street, and at the end of the month I paid the mortgage.
Wow, that's amazing.
Just before we leave Rose and Jean, Rose said to Helen afterwards, because Helen was hardly slept that week when she got up and knew what she was going to say every day, really had to wind herself up to talk to them. But afterwards, Rose said, all you had to do is ask me to come to a meeting and I would have come. And they're both still in the Lord in Christchurch, two great ladies in the fellowship. Fantastic.
Yeah.
So, Helen, most people wouldn't say, if they were describing you, that you were a shy type of person who felt uncomfortable talking to people.
No, the Lord has changed me.
Yeah. So when and how did that happen?
Well, when we first got to New Zealand, the first meeting we had was in a motel room and there were 4 of us there. And I remember standing there and I said to myself, Helen, you can't hide anymore. And that night I operated the gift of tongues for the first time. And I think that growing then with the assembly as it grew, I grew in confidence.
Yeah.
And by, of course, 15 years later, when we came back to Australia, by that time, I had completely got over it all, as you all know.
Yeah.
Yes.
Did you see a change in her from being the more shy person to being a more bolder person?
I suppose I did. I can't say I dwelt on it very much. I mean, I was very thankful that she did, because it really was hard going in those first few weeks mainly.
Yeah.
It got pretty easy after that. But in the first few weeks, a couple of times you sort of look at each other and say, what have we done?
Yeah.
Left Adelaide with 1,000 people and now we've got 4,
Yeah.
and what's going to... And I realise now if we hadn't had the people come down from Auckland and from Adelaide, I don't know where it would have survived, to be quite honest. And even the revival we had on Kangaroo Island years before was others doing the witnessing and me just running the meetings. And I suppose that's where we've always sort of survived more. I've never been a great personal witnesser, but I run a meeting, a happy meeting, and people come to the Lord that way. So
We've all got our strengths, right? There's all different roles.
Well, that's what it is the Lord has given me the courage.
So 15 years in New Zealand, what brought you back to Adelaide?
Unfortunately, the split sort of took the stuffing out of me a little bit, because everything was going so good. As I said, we had 170 people, and it went down from there. And our children left the fellowship, who were not children, of course.
Yeah.
2 of them were in their 30s, and Vicky was 29, and their husbands, all the grandchildren. At the same time here in Adelaide, my 2 brothers left the fellowship and their wives. And it was a big year. It was a Job year, really, in 97, year before we came back. So between 95 and 97, it had been, I suppose the saying is hard going. Then our hall got attacked by an arsonist. The second hall we bought. How many times? 6 times?
I think it's 5 or 6
5
times.
or 6 times.
Yes.
And then the last time it didn't quite burn it down, but the fire brigade came and they put it out. And it was sort of things that really sort of come to a bit of a halt.
Can I just say something then?
Yep.
We got the phone call from Pastor Mark about 12:30 in the morning, and he said, there is another attack on the hall, and the fire brigade are there. And we drove down there and we stood around, and eventually after the fire brigade left and it was under control, Jock and Pastor Mark and I stood outside the side door, and I remember somebody said, well, there's no way now, we've hit the bottom, it's only up from now on.
Yeah.
And it was a great feeling, actually, to say, we got to come back from
Yeah.
this. Yeah.
Because it must be incredibly hard. I mean, to have that not only once but 6 times.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And the cleaning up of the hall, I can remember plastic chairs don't do too well in
No,
a
they
fire.
don't.
They just melt into a...
You had to reinforce the roof. It had burnt into the rafters.
Yeah.
It's an old hall built in the 1930s.
Yeah.
And it burnt into the rafters a bit, but they decided that if we put a fresh bit of wood alongside what was already there without pulling the whole building to bits, we could repair it. We had to get rid of all the black and the soot. We got 2, it's the way they do it, 3 valuation, what do you call them, quotes from outside builders. And, of course, they picked the cheapest one, which was a bit over 100,000. And they said if you had a mortgage on the hall, never did because we had that money we brought from Australia, you would insist that you got one of them to do it because you've got to cover the mortgagee.
Yeah.
But seeing as you own the hall, we'll give you the money, you can do what you like with it. And so being a builder...
And so did you still have a mortgage on your house at this point? Because
yeah, we had house
I think we
mortgages.
did.
Yeah, we
were
house
buying
mortgages.
and selling houses.
Yeah.
We had mortgages.
Yeah.
The hall was debt-free.
Freehold.
Yeah. And so because it was freehold, you could...
He said, we'll give you the money and do what you like with it.
Yeah.
You don't even have to do it on the hall. If you don't, we'll be out.
Yeah.
We paid what we agreed to. So we repaired the hall with us working on, and not just us, others in the assembly, but mainly Mark and Julie. We only spent about 30 or 40,000, repaired it ourselves.
Yeah.
And then by that time we're starting to, no kids were leaving.
Yeah.
And I just suddenly sat down, I think it needs a new broom. I think rightly or wrongly, I felt like I'd run my course a little bit. Mark was not all that happy, but...
and so Pastor Mark was a pastor at this point?
He had been for quite a while in my 2IC.
Yeah.
So I said, we're going to go back to Adelaide.
He didn't really want us to go back. But...
And our kids were, unfortunately at the time, were not communicating even all that well with our kids. And I just said to Helen, look, Mark's young, and let's get out of the way before... And we dropped numbers quite a lot. We're down to about 50 people from maybe 100. So
and how old were you both at this time?
56, 57, 55. I was born in 42. I was 55.
Yeah.
And so we moved back to Adelaide, and Mark then started running the assembly. We'd repaired the hall, and we had that money left over. But unfortunately, numbers went on going down for a while. But in recent years, if I can jump ahead, assembly's gone exceedingly well. And when they had the hall for quite a few more years until the earthquake, and then the earthquake totally wrecked.
That was it then.
That was the end of it, unrepairable. And they were able to buy this new hall they've got now, cash.
Yeah.
Very good. So eventually that all did work out. And they're very evangelical. Some of you have met Renee, who's Mark and Julie's daughter, and you were talking about one of the brothers, and Luke also back in Christchurch. He's very keen, and they have pretty well new people at every meeting. The numbers have come back up again, not quite to what they were, but I reckon if they keep going like they will go back up again.
They were going to have a hall opening last year, weren't they?
This year,
earlier this year, that's correct. And we bought our tickets for it, but of course we can't go yet. So I think by the time they have the hall opening, they're going to have a lot of new people in as well, which will be really exciting.
That will be exciting.
Yeah.
So when you came back to Adelaide, so since then you've done quite a lot of travel overseas, haven't you, particularly to the UK?
Yes. So my situation was, I even said to Helen coming back, everybody that goes out is a pastor somewhere else, when they come back to Adelaide doesn't mean you're going to be a pastor. So I said, I should be ready for that. I don't mind being a pastor. Sometimes I wish I wasn't a pastor. And so I'll just take it whatever happens. And anyhow, they decided I would be a pastor. But what do we do with him? So I had
You can't just be a pastor by name. You've got to be a pastor in role.
But I'm afraid the first is the correct one. And so Pastor John was a little bit puzzled what to do. Will you go here? Will you go there? I remember saying to him, I'm going to have trouble picking on one of the Adelaide, Gawler wasn't going then.
So we had 3 Adelaide assemblies.
Ones and making that more important than the other 2. So when I left, it was just one big assembly. I still think of Adelaide as one big assembly. And really it has never changed in the now 22 years. So I'm still a fifth wheel on a wagon, still don't exactly fit in anywhere. But I'm very happy.
Well, we're pretty happy you're sort of at Woodcroft now.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
Sort of.
We see you a lot,
But
which is great.
We have an interest in the whole fellowship.
Still the same.
All
and not
over the
just
place.
Adelaide, the whole fellowship.
Yeah.
Even with New Zealand now, and for quite a few years I said to Ellen, let's not make Christchurch special. We've got 5 assemblies in New Zealand. Let's make the whole 5 of them equal in our mind.
And now
we
with
used to travel.
with what's happened in the world around coronavirus
Yeah.
and with
Yes.
video meetings, you're attending meetings all over the
Yeah,
place.
exactly.
Yes,
I've never
that's
given so
right.
many talks for years.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
so back up to Gawler tomorrow, by the way. I don't mind that. I love going all over the place. We've got gypsy blood. There's no doubt about it. So going back to when we came back, I knew it was going to be a little bit hard it wasn't hard, but a little bit different to fit in.
Well, it's very different to coming back to an assembly where there's established people, established
That's right.
pastors, 3 centres where you were you had a very clear, distinct role in New Zealand.
What happened with Adelaide in particular, though, is I grew with it because my family was one of the first families ever came to the Lord in Adelaide, and the other ones, unfortunately, all dropped away, and we became the original family. And therefore, I grew with Adelaide with all what it went through the 60s and the 70s, up to that 83. And I had been Pastor John's too, I see, you might say, all that time. But I really feel, it mostly sounds like I've been trying to super humble, but I'm not. I really believe it in my heart that it got to a point where I would have found it difficult to go on being the 2IC. It needed somebody, I think, like Pastor Paul. And I really thank God that he got rid of me without getting rid of me. So I went to New Zealand. And then
There are a few ways that the Lord can get rid of us, and sending you to New Zealand to set the work up there, that's a pretty good way, I reckon.
It was.
It was.
And while I was in New Zealand, I came to realise that being the top guy possibly wasn't quite me. I did it. I think I mostly did it better than I think I did it for 15 years, but I love being part of a team and not being the buck doesn't end with me.
Yeah.
I'm a bit cowardly there. So when I
I don't think cowardly is the word.
Yeah.
I think we all have different strengths, and we need to play to the strengths.
That's really how we are. So, as you know, we both love Bible prophecy. Maybe Helen even a bit more than me, but we feed off each other on that sort of thing. We love.
That's been a massive calling for you over the last few years, hasn't it?
Oh,
Yeah, I
I think
think-
so. A fascination.
Also a fascination for me for the history.
Yeah.
And had that windfall when all the old magazines came back into on a digital form from the 40s.
Yeah.
And I was able to then go through all them and get the original history and write the history and so on.
So had you both always been interested in prophecy and history, or did that sort of where did the spark for that come
The
from?
spark came for me as a 9.5-year-old when I received the Holy Spirit in Bowen Heads in Geelong, and went to my first meetings and heard Pastor Jack Clay. Now, I can't remember whether we mentioned Jack before, but he was a coin and medal collector, and he inherited his father's coins and medals. And during the Second World War, Jack was a merchant seaman, travelled and added to his collection. And then shortly after the war, of course, he came to the Lord. And he began to look at his medals and coins and realise that these ancient ones told history, and that history corresponded with what the Bible said. So then he would make up sets of slides of these and show them. And of course, Jack would talk for hours. And I used to just sit there. As a 9.5-year-old, I loved it. He just brought it to life. And I never forgot it. And as the years went by, I suppose it ticked over in my head.
So you weren't really doing a lot of research or anything at this point. It was
no.
just embedded there in the back of your head somewhere.
Just right.
Yeah.
This interest and a love for it. And then many, many years later, one day, Peter Goodrich said to me when we were down here, this is probably 13, 14 years ago or what, he just said to me, can you and Uncle Jock come one night and talk about Bible prophecy at our place? And I said to Jock going home, I'm going to study this stuff now. I've got time. I'm going to read all these books we've ever collected, and I want to find out what's really right, and let's record it.
The other thing that had an impact on you was when it was David Matz.
Oh, David Matz up at Elizabeth. This all happened at about the same time. And I had talked to David a little bit about this, and he loved all these things too. And then he had a heart attack and he died. really quickly before his wife could get to the hospital or anything. And
Liz? Not Liz. Liz, that's right.
And I said to Jock, just imagine if something like that happened to me and I'm in hospital and I go into a coma and I wake up and I say, Helen, you said to yourself you were going to do that and you never did it. So you better start right now. Don't run any risks. Do it straight away. So I went out and I bought all this A3 cardboard and I started handwritten.
And you haven't stopped since.
No, I've worn out 5 typists and now I've learned to type myself.
Because it's not just you have other people involved in putting together the documents and other things as well. Yeah.
The other thing that I think we're both very interested in is the whole work. Now, we haven't got involved particularly in the mission field, and that's exceedingly well covered in here, and they have great revival, whether it be Africa or Fiji or Papua New Guinea. So we have got involved in Europe and really try to help. Not that we're in charge, Pastor Paul's in charge of Europe, but as the anchor person, whatever you call it, the liaison person. But under that, I like, and he knows that we like travelling to England. I think we've been 8 or 9 times, going through all the British assemblies and most of the European assemblies, and we love doing that. And if this coronavirus ever goes, we'll go back and do that again.
Yes.
I mean, obviously that ties nicely into your Bible prophecy pieces as well, doesn't it? So there's
I suppose we particularly love England because of the Britishers, or the Isles afar off, as the Bible calls it, and all the descendants of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob and all that part. And England to us is just a mass of history. Now, we can go to beautiful places like anybody can and look at a scene. Like we drove right through France and Austria and right through to Hungary. And it was nice, beautiful country. It really didn't mean a lot to us, though, when you hear other people rave on about the Swiss Alps or something. And England, to us, it's the history connected with that same beauty. England's got all that beauty. And I know now and again I've said to people here in Australia that have immigrated here about how we love England, and they said, oh, no, I would far rather be in Australia. And I say, where did you come from? Oh, Birmingham. I said, I'm not talking about Birmingham. I'm talking about the English countryside. It's very different. So
we bought an old motorhome on eBay from Australia.
And when was this?
2014.
Okay.
Yeah, and found it, sent the money to Pastor Bob, and he very kindly went up and bought it for us. Did the transfer of the money from his bank account then into this other gentleman. And that old motorhome was 20 years old when we bought it. It was such a blessing. We went to all the assemblies in Europe and all over England in it. And we had at least we had our own bed every night.
And so how long did you live in the motorhome for?
Up to 6 months once. No, not 6 months, 3 months. But towards the end, maybe more, 6 weeks. We went 4 times.
Yeah. And how old were you at this point?
70s, both of us. We haven't finished yet.
But the good thing was you had the same bed every night, even if it was uncomfortable. At least it was the same.
At least it was, predictably uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Exactly.
But it was so good. The first thing we took it to was the Holland camp at Wasser-Cooper, and we felt like Mordecai in the gate. Everybody came on the way into the tent. Parked right where everybody went into the tent.
Yeah. Yes. So we're always having visitors. Very good.
That would be fantastic.
Oh, it was
Pastor
so good.
Peter Visser now and again hop in there and said, they can't see me in here. I want a break.
And then we took it to Ireland and we parked illegally on the Hill of Tyre.
You parked what, sorry?
Illegally?
We might edit that out.
You don't need to say illegally. I think we just parked on the side of the road.
We parked I don't
think it was illegally.
We parked up by the hill of Tara, right beside it, in a park off the side. I mean, it wasn't a car park. Nobody else was there, and slept the night there. It was awesome. It's such an interesting place to go. And I think one of the very interesting places in Ireland to visit was Devonish Island near Inniskillen, because I had read during some of the study I'd done how it was generally believed around Inniskillen by university professors and locals that Jeremiah the prophet had gone there So
That was only the legend.
In the legend. So we thought, well, let's go and have a look at this place, Devonish Island. So it's in Lochern. So we got on the tourist boat to go, and there was about 60 Irish people there, all yabbering away in Irish. And I was sitting on the aisle, and a lady opposite me turned to her friend, and she said, do you know Jeremiah the prophet is buried on Devonish Island? My ear flapped like a cabbage leaf, and I said to Jock, did you hear that? But he hadn't heard it. So anyway, we went off the boat. We walked up, we walked around, and the chap who was the tourist guide, his name was Steve, he had said as we were going along, he said, Devonish Island, Devonish means Island of the Oxen. And I said to Jock, I like that, because Jeremiah the prophet had said, oh, that I might leave my people and go into the wilderness. Well, that particular word wilderness is a place where cattle graze. And I thought, yes, he would rest in peace in a place like this, if there's any truth in this story. So then we walked up and we walked around the hill, and as we were coming back down, I said to Jock, I'll chat to that lady. So I caught up with her and I said, excuse me, but I couldn't help but overhear what you said to your friend about Jeremiah the prophet. And she said, yes, well, they told us on the tour.
10 years before.
10 years before, yeah, that Jeremiah was buried here. And I said, well, did they show you anything? She said, yes, they did. So she walked around, she's kicking around, she couldn't remember. It was 10 years before. So I said, oh, that's all right. Thank you anyway. And by this time it was time to leave. Everybody was going back onto the boat. So Jock and Helen come down the last, like Brown's cows. And Steve is standing out the front, welcoming everybody on, making sure they didn't fall in the water or anything. And I said to him, and I picked my words carefully, I said, Steve, have you ever heard the legend of Jeremiah the prophet being buried here? And his face lit up like the sun, didn't it? He said, yes, come with me. So he strides off up the hill, leaves all these people behind in the boat. And he said, we used to talk about this all the time, but we got anti-Semitic comments. And he said, do you know the Jews come here all the time looking for Jeremiah's grave? So anyway, we're walking up and he's chatting away, and he gets quite up the hill away, and he says, there's something here. So there's a marker here, a stone. And he starts kicking around, and we're thinking, yeah, there's stones everywhere.
Well, there was another guy there locking up the toilet?
Yeah, and he called to him, and he said, hey, whatever your name is, where's Jeremiah's tomb? And he said, oh, it's over here a bit. So he goes over, and there's a stone about this big.
So about 400 by 400?
Yeah. This marks the spot. And we're looking at each other, oh, yeah. And he said, yes, every time they do an aerial survey here, they say there is something here. But we're not allowed to dig, he said. So the legend is definitely Devonish Island. And having walked around it, we reckon, yes, Jeremiah, if you're here, this is much more peaceful than Jerusalem or anywhere else. So that was just a really good thing. And we did that in the motorhome. Yeah.
So I hear that there might be a dastardly plan to go back to the UK and travel, but not in a motorhome.
No, this time in a boat, what they call a narrow boat. A lot of people would have heard of them. And twice over those years that we've been to England, twice we've hired them for a week here and a week there. And
so they're like a kind of canal type boat.
Yes, it's a very narrow. They're like a big caravan. So the one that we're sort of interested in is 55 feet long, which is a lot longer than a caravan, maybe double the length of a caravan, of a decent one. And they're only the width of a caravan. They're all in feet and inches there, 6 foot, 10 inches wide. And as I said, 57 feet long. And
so that's about just under 20 metres long by about 3 metres wide, roughly. No, 2 metres wide.
2 metres wide, yeah. Exactly right. Not very wide. They're called a narrow boat. The name says it all. And there's thousands of them, and you can pay a huge amount of money for them, or you can get quite a reasonable price for a bit older ones, which we actually like the older ones better, a lot more atmosphere than the modern ones. So even now I go online looking at canal boats. But to do it, we possibly have got enough money just from selling our property and buying this property. So we would have overheads, and now that I'm on the pension, I have to really analyse all that.
Yeah.
So whether we can do it financially, I don't know. But I think we'd want things a lot better in England, like things like a vaccine and not the lockdown and all that. So whether that'll ever happen, I don't know.
We'll see if the Lord's in it. If he allows us to do this last old age dream where we can park this thing, it's very cheap accommodation, and then we can get up and spend lots of time with the saints.
Mainly like to get a marina near a railway station, because they've got a fantastic rail system in England, and get to the meeting. Try to go every Sunday to a meeting. One of the, how many assemblies? 5?
One of the assemblies, whichever one. Yeah.
1, 2, 3,
Old
4,
men shall dream
6.
dreams. It's a nice thought.
It's been
You never know.
summers in England and summers in Australia.
Well, I reckon if anyone's going to do it, you guys are going to do it.
Yeah, for sure. I look forward to it.
Well, we have enjoyed it on the 2 occasions before, and we had fabulous fellowship on it where saints came and stayed with us, and it was very, very, very good. Yeah.
And you can fit a couple of double beddy type things in
Yeah,
there.
you can. So if you
Yes.
did have
So if Emily and I came and
Ben and
visited
Emily
you,
came,
yeah.
you can
Absolutely.
sleep in the dining.
Absolutely.
No, mostly we
So
do
when are you
the other
going?
one.
So the last time we went, we had Lee and Yanni came on board, and we did a long trip with them. It was the most glorious day. It is a wonderful way for somebody to unwind if they're
Yeah, it is a good unwind.
stressed.
Yeah, I bet. Well, thank you so much for
No,
telling
love it.
all of your amazing stories. In fact, we didn't get to all of your amazing stories.
No.
Probably only got 10%, I reckon.
Not even that.
I should really say right at the end of this, though, when I tell the history of our fellowship, Pastor John always says, I don't remember it like that.
Well, I've got his version too. So,
That's good.
so now what we can do is we can compare them. They're pretty
That's
close.
good.
Yeah,
That's
hopefully
funny.
very close.
We're done. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very much.
Well, there you have it. What a wonderful story of 60 years of serving the Lord. I'm not sure there's really much more to say other than a big thank you to Pastor Jock and Helen for not only sharing their story, but for their wonderful service to the church and their service to our Lord and Saviour, and for inspiring others to follow in their footsteps. Stay tuned for future episodes of Lives Changed by God. And until then, God bless.